You want answers?
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You want answers?
You have offended my family.
I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
You can't handle the truth.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
All right, well, I got some new polling information that just was released. It's taken May 4th through May 9th. And readers of this blog and listeners to this show and watchers of this live telecast will recognize that there's been an ongoing debate between the Marijuana Policy Project on one side and the marijuana reform organizations in Oregon on the other. And this debate has centered around whether or not we should put our money and time and efforts and volunteer into a 2014 legalization effort, or should we wait to legalize in 2016, use the intervening years for a public education campaign? Well, this new poll was released in Oregon, and it shows that the locals here seem to know a little bit more about the political climate for legalization. There's an astounding 57% of likely 2014 voters supporting a specific tax and regulate proposal for marijuana legalization. Let me read you the actual question here on the in this poll. And this is a poll from Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner Research, May 4th through 9th, 602 likely 2014 voters. This was the question. There will be an initiative on the ballot next November concerning marijuana law in Oregon. Let me read you a brief description of this initiative. This measure would regulate marijuana in a similar manner to alcohol by making the possession of marijuana legal in the state of Oregon for adults 21 and older, regulating the licensing of marijuana businesses through the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, and taxing the production of marijuana. Tax revenues would be distributed to public schools, law enforcement, cities and counties, and mental health and substance abuse programs. The measure would allow the production of homegrown marijuana for personal non-commercial use if the marijuana is not in public view and the household quantities do not exceed specified limits. This measure would prohibit the sale or possession of marijuana to minors, maintain penalties for driving under the influence of marijuana, and retain the right of employers to enforce drug-free workplace policies. If the election were held today, would you vote yes to approve this measure or no to reject it? And we've got 57% saying they would support such a measure. And when you get these very specific proposals, usually it goes like this. You say, should we legalize marijuana? And you get a big number. And then you start adding, details. Well, should we regulate it like this and tax it like that and do it like this? That's when the numbers start to drop. So starting with the specific initiative at 57% is amazing. And when you break down these vote totals here in the poll, you find a very robust support going on here. We've got definitely vote yes at 37%. Over a third is our base that will support this definitely. Probably vote yes, 18%. And lean yes, 3%. Now, I know that adds up to 58, but you got to round some of this stuff. And because of rounding, it's actually 57. So 57% are on the yes side. Definite no's were 31%. Definite no's were 31, and probably no, 6%, lean no, 2%. They got about 38% for no. And the gap between yes and no is 19 points. So shortly after Washington and Colorado legalized marijuana in 2012, MPP's executive director, Rob Kampia, threatened Oregon locals with a complete cutoff of financial and organizational support if locals didn't support his vision of waiting until the 2016 presidential election to run a marijuana initiative. This is the quote from his Huffington Post piece. There are already well-meaning activists in Oregon and other states who aren't remembering the efforts of well-meaning activists in California, who ignored the lesson of waiting for a presidential election year and pushed a risky initiative during a non-presidential election in 2010, which I'm sure felt good, but succeeded in failing. Now, in addition to that public admonishment on Huffington Post, Kampia sent a private memo to Oregon locals with more direct language. This was his quote from that memo. As things currently stand, a tax and regulate initiative in Oregon in November 2014 would be expected to receive approximately 47% of the vote. 47% baseline from November 2012, plus 1% for better drafting, plus 2% for better advertising, minus 3% because it's not a presidential election. Given that an initiative in November 2014 would be almost certain to lose, MPP would contribute no money toward a signature drive, paid staff, or advertising during the 2013-2014 cycle. If, however, a tax and regulate initiative is placed on a November 2014 ballot, then Oregon will fall by the wayside and lose its time in the sun in November 2016, in the same way that California was premature in 2010 and was unable to raise any funding for a 2012 ballot initiative. The comparison between California's past failure and Oregon's prospective failure is pretty precise. End quote. Now, in a subsequent town hall meeting with MPP Steve Fox, he's the national political director for MPP, I attended this meeting and asked him a question about this, wanting to know why we would wait until 2016 when 2014 seems so viable. And I'll give you his response here on our video screen just as soon as I get that centered. And you can hear audio there on the show, listening on podcast. This is Steve Fox's answer to my question. Of your points. The point on timing, I wanted to ask a few questions with. I agree that 2016 is an absolute slam dunk, but I don't see that 2014 is not a layup. And the reason why is that, I mean, you quote some of the statistics of how the midterm elections have gone in the past, but that was before 2 states had legalized marijuana. And we are right next to Vancouver, and we're going to see a flow of money going across the border to Vancouver. Our Oregonians already called out the legislature to do something about this, so there's a lot of pressure right now. I'm kind of, there's a part of me that says, you know, strike while the iron is hot in this case, that the previous midterms don't necessarily tell us what we're going to see in the next midterm now that this issue is popular and getting talked about a lot. And in passing, you mentioned MPP's 2006 effort in Colorado, which earned a lot of media, you said, and gave a lot of education. And yet when I saw the memo from Rob Campia, I saw what I interpreted to be a veiled threat that if anyone did anything in 2014, MPP was going to bail on Oregon for 2016. So can you, I mean, make me feel, I don't care either way. I just want to support all of Oregon got behind something and passed it. So if that's a roadblock, this 2014 stuff I bring up, how can we get past that?
Okay, which part of that? I don't. In terms of the veiled threat, I would just want to address that because I think what Rob was probably saying. That's Rob Campia, MPP's executive director. Is not necessarily that MPP will bail. I mean, who knows what will happen? But we've been in this situation before, and I'll address the difference that might exist because Washington and Colorado passed. But we've been in this situation before where in 2009 we were trying to encourage there to not be an initiative in California in 2010. And the point was you think you might win, but you might not win, and if you lose, it's going to be nearly impossible to encourage funding to come to California because you will have just come off a loss, and it just might not be there. And you know what Rob might be suggesting is that it will make it very hard to raise money if you do 2014, and perhaps for him, he may even know that he works with the fundraising and I don't. So he may even have a better sense that coming off a loss really makes it nearly impossible. And if there are other states he needs to raise money for, it just wouldn't be at the top of the priority list. So, I mean, I guess that's part of it. But in terms of the momentum, I mean, I've said this earlier, but I don't think I said it here. I'm trying to remember. But the 7-point bump, did I mention the 7-point bump? And the likelihood of not knowing what's going to be happening in Washington, whether there will be diversion issues or anything like that, you just don't know. I mean, you might feel its momentum now, but it might be coming in the other direction in 2014. You just don't know. I would never say that winning in 2014 is impossible. It might be possible. But you're going to have to invest a lot of money and then not know you might, or not you personally, but people in Oregon might say, well, we did a poll today, and it says we have 58 support, so I think we're going to be all right. And then you spend X hundreds of thousands of dollars on a signature drive, and you get it on the ballot, and then all of a sudden, all the newspaper reports are negative stories about how Washington's initiative is being implemented. And then all of a sudden you drop to like 53%, and then you get that, the midterm election drop that occurs when people actually vote, because it's a more conservative electorate than what you got in your polling in February of 2013. So it all comes together, and then you might end up with a loss. And then, for what? You had a guarantee in 2016, and now you don't have 2016. So is it worth it? Do you want to roll the dice? All that money to be spent on 2014 on a signature drive or anything else could all be put into public education that only increases your odds of winning in 2016. So if you want marijuana to be legal in Oregon in 2016, you can do it. And pretty much running an initiative in 2014 is the only thing that's going to mess it up.
So there's a
quick follow-up from
Steve Fox there saying that only running an initiative in 2014 would mess up 2016. So if that's not a threat to not run something in 2014 from MPP, I don't know what is. And a little bit about this kind of bothers me too. What would have happened early on in the Prop 19 campaign in California, instead of sitting on its wallet, if MPP was spending money to educate and advertise for that measure? Richard Lee put up $1.5 million of his own money to get it on the ballot. No big funders stepped up to support it until the last couple of weeks before the election. So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy to say that midterm legalization initiatives can't win if you don't fund them. And this idea that there's going to be, bad turnout. We're going to get a 58% now. There'll be a bad implementation in Washington, and there'll be blowback from that. So don't move in 2014 with a 58% poll, because over the next 18 months, there may be bad news. But if we wait till 2016, we can overcome 42 months of bad news. And I still have yet to see how a potential loss in 2014 dooms 2016 any more than our loss in 2012 doomed 2016. According to our poll from May of 2013, registered likely 2014 voters, otherwise known as that more conservative electorate we're worried about, when read that lengthy statement about tax and regulate, 37% definitely vote yes, 18% probably vote yes, and 3% are leaning toward yes. That's 57% after the rounding that say they'll support a very specific tax and regulate campaign in Oregon in 2014. And if we use Rob Camp's formula, he said you get +2 if you get better advertising, which we'll have, and you get -3 for a midterm election, we're still looking at 56%, or a layup. And when they get to the next question in this poll, let me read this one to you. This one will really blow your mind. After they asked the very specific question about we're going to tax and regulate it and give the money to schools and have drunk driving and blah, 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 all the details, they came up with this more broad question. Regardless of how you feel about this specific initiative, do you think marijuana should be taxed, regulated, and legalized for adults? Of likely 2014 Oregon voters, 51% said yes strongly. We have a majority in Oregon that strongly believes marijuana should be taxed and regulated for adults. And then the follow-up, the yes, not strongly, the kind of, yeah, I suppose so, was another 13%. The no, the strong no's, hell no, marijuana should never be legalized, hell no, 29%. With another 5% of, I don't think so. Making the total yeses, and again, there's some rounding involved here, the total yeses 63%, and the total no's 34%. Only 1 out of 3 likely 2014 Oregon voters believes marijuana should not be taxed, regulated, and legalized for adults. If 2016 is a slam dunk, 2014 is a breakaway layup. Open court, baby. Phi Slamma Jamma. Let's move on 2014. The landscape has changed, MPP. You're still fighting for legalization with a pre-legalization strategy. Now that marijuana is legal in 2 states, the whole perception of this issue is different among the voters. We are the majority now. Legalization's no longer a pipe dream. Pardon the pun. It's a money vacuum, sucking dollars from Portland to Vancouver. Supporting legalization is no longer something that's taboo because you're endorsing criminality. It's now a legitimate policy option that 2 states have already adopted. Now, if there's going to be bad news from Washington's implementation, it's going to be in the form of DUID stats or youth use rates or diversion estimates that won't be made public until late 2014 when the figures from 2013 can be collected. So why not move forward now and just deal with a month or 2 of bad news instead of having to wait till 2016 and allow 3 years of bad news to build up? Besides, this year, for the first time in my reporting history, all of the Oregon local organizations and leaders are working together. And I cannot tell you what a huge improvement that is in this state. Also, we've got leaders from all the other organizations, the national level, sitting at the table, except MPP, who refuses to join. And they're pushing sensible language that can actually pass. And they've got some big funders with some commas in their bank accounts, too. This part of the landscape has changed as well, MPP. As entrepreneurs sense the impending green rush, there are more deep pockets than just Peter Lewis's.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
That's all the time we got here for Hour 1, but stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio with me and Brian the Red, and your calls at 971-533-7111. For Brian the Red, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.